So today we are talking about my generation. Uh, so so Eddie, what's one thing you like about your generation, our generation?
I wanted to finish like the rest of the song, but then I didn't get confident enough that I felt like I was gonna mess it up, so I froze. What do I like about our generation? God, it's gonna make me feel or sound old, and probably feel old too. I think the idea that we like grew up without technology, like we grew up with technology, is like interesting to think back to.
Yeah.
Um, I feel like we, as a generation, kind of started to be more open about like mental health and insecurities and stuff. So I think that's positive. But I'll go with those two: the growing up with, like, alongside technology,
Hmm.
and then the maybe just more openness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like
What do you
it.
think?
Yeah, I would say first thing that came to mind for some reason was like burned CDs. Love that about our generation.
Fuck yeah,
Being
that
able to
was
just like
cool.
put all your favorite songs on a CD and like give it to your friend. And I
Yeah.
remember I had just like random hippie kids coming up to me at school because they knew I was into music, and they'd be like, "Hey man, you got to check out the Disco Biscuits. Here's a CD." I'm like, "Great, why
Fuck.
not?"
Shout out to Disco Biscuit.
Shout out to old Johnny Burlew and the Disco Biscuits. He's the one
That's
who
funny.
introduced me.
um, Man, that's really taking me back. You think back to like I had random ass CDs, man, with just like random music on it.
Oh
Just
yeah. And like you still find them every once in a while and you're like, what the hell is on
you
this
know,
thing?
when I sold my truck, I took the CD that had been in the CD player. It had to have been in there for at least 6 or 7 years, and I
Hmm.
definitely took it. So it's somewhere. I think it's in my car right now, but I don't have a CD player. So it might
Yeah.
just be sitting in there. But it probably had like, I'm sure there was like a Kesha song. I definitely had Friday by Rebecca Black as like a funny, like, that was on there. Definitely some like ass shaking music. Just everything, every
Oh
piece of
yeah.
genre. Yeah.
Oh, and Millennials had the best ass shaking music. Just like I listened to some of the stuff that we grew up with, and I'm like, this
Yeah.
is grotesque. Like this
Yeah.
is this is truly
This is
off rails
bad.
sexual.
Yeah.
Like our parents let us
Yeah.
listen. They didn't let us, but we listened to this. Like,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, remember, I've mentioned this a couple times. Like, the first time I downloaded the explicit version of a song and was like, holy shit! Like, this is not appropriate. So,
yeah,
yeah.
it's crazy.
Yeah. Well, speaking of generations, I mean, that's kind of what we're talking about today. We're looking at differences across generations, similarities between generations, just overall generations and their view on mental health. This really comes from one of the classes that I taught very early on in the semester. I felt like it'd be a good idea just to kind of revisit it. A lot of the topics we've talked about, bits and pieces here and there. But I thought it'd be cool if we just kind of focused on it. Over our time of working primarily with teens and their families, Justin and I definitely specialize in that. We've found that, like, unsurprisingly, that there's differences between the generations when it comes to their views on mental health, especially if you work with a teen and their family. Like, you can definitely see it like in session sometimes. So we wanted to talk about it. One thing I'll mention, and probably the inspiration behind the this conversation alongside with my class, is the book The Anxious Generation, right, that I read a little while back by Dr. Jonathan Haidt. It came out where he basically talks about like why he thinks Gen Z is the quote anxious generation. And if you haven't read the book yet, spoiler alert, or maybe pause right now and then come back to the episode after you finish it. But if you want a quick synopsis of it, basically he talks about, his main points are that Gen Z had a lack of a play based childhood, so they weren't taking risks, they weren't, leaving the house for hours at a time and coming back when the streetlights came on. They weren't, getting into arguments and discourse with their friends and then figuring it out as kids did or do. So having a lack of a play based childhood, he thinks, is part of it. He He also feels that they're just over parenting by parents, again, impacting their ability to take risks, impacting their ability to just kind of learn through natural social behaviors and interactions. And then the last one that he talks about is pretty obvious, and Mr. or Dr. Justin Romano over here gave a pretty important TED talk about it. But just the overuse of phones, the internet, social media, all of the above. So that's kind of his 2 cents on it, but really kind of help shape the idea for this episode alongside with the class that I taught very early on in the semester this spring term.
So we want to just define what specific years the different generations categorize into. So the baby boomers is kind of the oldest one we'll be talking about. And these are technically people from who were born in the years 1946 through 1964.
Mm-hmm. If you are like Justin and I, millennials, you most likely, can we make that generalization? Most likely your parents are somewhere in the Gen X age. Some maybe a little older, right on like the cusp of it.
Mm-hmm.
But the next one is Gen X, so that's about 1965 to 1980. We're gonna say about for all of this, just because it depends who you ask. The years
Yeah,
are so fluid, and they run together. So that's about where Gen X is.
And actually, technically, both of my parents are boomers. 55
Well,
and 59. They were a little bit
well, look at
older when
that.
they had kids. I
Yeah.
know, right? So I actually
See what happens when I assume I make an ass out of myself. Not even you and me.
exactly. Which I like that my parents are boomers because I love that time frame. Like I really fell in love with the music that they were
Mm,
into growing up. So I've got a soft spot in my heart for boomers, even though it seems like there's a strong conflict between millennials
yeah.
and boomers. Have you played the board game Millennials versus Boomers?
No. What is that?
They actually have like a full trivia game where it's like you have to answer trivia questions about each other's generations.
Oh,
Yeah, and then about your own too, so you can
yeah.
actually get some points. But I thought that
Yeah.
was kind of an interesting game
Oh,
and
yeah.
some good team building.
That's a cool idea. Yeah.
Next up, after Gen Xers, or did we already say Gen?
Yep. We
No,
got
we,
Gen
yeah, we
X
did.
out the way.
Yeah, we got Millennials, which are typically 1981 to 1996.
Hmm. We have Gen Z, our current kind of, well, this is where it's interesting. They're like our current like teens, but also it bleeds into Gen Alpha. But Gen Z is about 1997 to 2010, which actually, if I think about it, our Gen Z, our youngest ones are 17 right now. So is my math right? No, they're not. They're 15. 15.
So yeah, they're
Yes.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right at high
right at the
school age.
beginning of
Yeah.
Gen Alpha.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, Gen Alpha 2011 to 2025, and then
Hmm.
the new one Gen Beta is this year and onward.
As of January.
Yeah, we just
Brand new.
changed.
Yeah. Some other generations to think about, or just to be aware of, is the greatest generation. I don't even remember what time frame they said that was, but I guess if they're so great, sure. There's the silent generation, and then there's boomers too. Have you ever heard of that?
I had never heard of Boomers Part 2. No.
Yeah, or they're called like the Jones generation. So if you have ever heard the phrase "keeping up with the Joneses,"
Yeah.
that's kind of where it came from. Like in some way, shape, or form, it came from that.
Oh, interesting.
They're
Yeah.
related to each other. Yeah.
And yeah, the Boomers 2, the Jones generation, is the cohort between baby boomers and Gen X,
Hmm.
with some defining characteristics, including most who did not grow up with World War II veteran parents. And as they reached adulthood, there was no compulsory military service and no defining political cause.
Yeah.
So no wonder no one's heard of them.
Damn. The other one that we wanted to mention is the silent generation. They're characterized by, and this is, I mean, there's definitely still people alive, but like much
Mhm.
older, characterized by things like the Great Depression and World War II, and they have they tend to draw towards conformity and traditionalism. But one thing across the generations, it's a common theme, is just how much the impact of social, political, and technological events have on each age range. So even if all the events are different, each of those has some type of impact on each of the generations.
Totally. It's so funny that when we talked about our generation, technology got brought up, music got brought up. There's a lot with our generation culturally and politically that are very important to us too. So the things that we
Yeah.
go through define us absolutely. And
Yeah.
the things that defines baby boomers, they are traditionally hardworking,
Hmm.
traditional, conservative in their social values. And what I've noticed about baby boomers is that they tend to be very private. They don't want to
Yeah.
put a lot of their, or at least before Facebook really blew up, they were a little. It's I feel like
That's
it's
hella funny.
changed. I do feel
Yeah.
like boomers, like I remember my parents growing up, it was let's not tell anyone anything. Let's not release
Hmm.
anything. Like don't put your name out there unless you absolutely have to. And then Facebook came along and then all of a sudden it just seems like
Out the
boomers are
window.
sharing more than anyone,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, that's hella funny. Yeah, that's a good point. For Gen Xers, we've got they tend to be independent. Have you ever heard the term latchkey kids?
Yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
like the kids who just they had a latchkey, they could
Hmm.
come home after school. There was no one really to
Yeah.
watch them. They just hung out and watched
Took care of
TV.
themselves.
Yeah, took care of
Yeah.
themselves.
Yep. That
But
that was a new phrase for me within the last
yeah,
year. And then when I
yeah,
shared it with my class earlier, I had students who were like, I've never heard that before. So that was kind of cool to teach them something different.
yeah.
But because of things like that, because of being independent, you also see characteristics like being resourceful, and also having like some skepticism towards authority. I think if I go back and look at the year range, you got 65 to 80. There's some like um free spiritedness in that year range. There's some, I don't want to call people like hippies, but there's some rage against the authority for sure that was kind of going on in those years. Even if I wasn't there, that's what I've heard.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
Millennials are typically seen as very socially conscious, very diverse, and pretty tech savvy
Hmm.
because they grew up alongside technology. And I saw a really interesting meme that kind of struck home with me is that someone was a computer trainer at their job and said that the younger kids these days, the Gen Z, he says
Hmm.
teaching them like desktop computer skills is like teaching the boomers desktop computer skills because they didn't
Really?
grow up with desktop computers. They mostly had
Oh,
tablets and touch screens. So he says
yeah.
this newer generation doesn't know how to use a computer.
It has its own. Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because every one of our students, and I have seen this where a lot of schools will give their, let's just say like middle high school, like a laptop or a Chromebook. I didn't have a laptop till I was in college, so like
Yeah.
they're growing up with that now too. So I think that causes its own differences too. Like a laptop is definitely different. It's just kind of the use of it, and yeah, that's interesting. I didn't know that. I never
Mm-hmm.
heard of that. For some characteristics of our Gen Zers, they have like a global perspective. They seem to be pretty in the know about things, or at least have an idea that things are going on in the world. Tech immersed, and then this idea of like being diverse and inclusive. I will say, I mean, working with teens, I don't know if you would agree, Justin, but like they seem to be pretty inclusive and more open minded. Maybe not the ones that we've lost to like some of this red pill super right wing content, but they seem to be pretty diverse and inclusive from everything I've seen.
Yeah. And an important consideration to all of this is just looking at each generation and a piece of privilege that they hold.
Yeah.
And especially for Gen Alpha, their privilege is freedom from responsibilities in a lot of sense and
Hmm.
care and guidance from adults. I mean, Generation Alpha is probably the most looked after generation. Like my son is 2, he is generation alpha, and I don't think there is really ever a time, and he's still a toddler, that people
Hmm.
aren't watching him. Like
Yeah.
he is constantly, unless he's sleeping, there
Yeah.
are eyes on him at all times, and I think that's how most kids in that generation have been raised.
Yeah. He's not currently a latchkey kid.
He is not a latch, and now that I think of it, even while he's sleeping, we have a monitor so that we can keep eyes on him at
Yeah.
all times. Like
Yeah.
that's just these kids are growing up with constantly being supervised and watched.
Hmm. Yeah. For Gen Z, there's this increase in autonomy, things like starting to drive, to work, get your first job. They kind of have a more active role in family decisions, whether or not it's they agree with the decision or they want to participate in it. I'm giving out like the stereotype of an angsty teen, but they tend to be more involved with those kinds of things. They have more opportunities for exploration. You think of starting to shift towards getting to college age, starting to shift to being in high school, getting to choose things that you want to do, extracurriculars. There's an increase in legal protections. It does depend on your state, but things like confidentiality, you can make your own medical decisions, varies kind of once you hit that teenage years. Depending on the state, you get some, you definitely get some responsibility. They have knowledge of technology, and then they start to shift to kind of this flexibility to relocate as they get older, with the possibility of something like college or traveling and doing things like that.
Yeah. Millennials, they tend to have more freedom to make independent life choices. We're getting to the age now where millennials are grown up, even though I think a lot of millennials still see themselves as young people, still see
Yeah,
themselves as kind of kids.
yeah,
I know I struggle with that too, where I'm like, I'm still a kid. I'm like, but I have a child.
yeah, yeah.
Uh, they also have a higher energy available for career and personal goals. So this is the time of our life where a lot of people are really hustling, trying to make
Mhm.
a name for themselves, trying to make enough money, trying to afford a house. And plus, millennials have somewhat of an advantage because they do have a pretty solid uh, knowledge of technology.
Yeah. For Gen X, things like greater career and financial stability seems to be there generally. They have authority and influences in spaces that they are part of because of their age and experience. I think of something specifically like work. And then they have access to the connections built over time. Naturally, as you get older, you meet more people, you've built connections. That's just seems like a pretty natural thing that happens as you get older.
And then my favorite, baby boomers, they're getting more freedom from full time work, although it seems like a lot more boomers are having to work later into life because of
Yeah.
financial issues. And, unfortunately for them, the economy seems to be tanking. And I know a lot of older people are really worried about that. Um, Baby boomers tend to have more access to specialized programs and potential access to build on wealth. Like
Mhm.
wealth builds wealth. They have the money to invest and increase their money, which a
Mhm.
lot of younger generations are worried that they're going to be not be in the same place that boomers are.
Yeah. Wait, why is the economy tanking? Is it
Oh,
just
no
general?
particular reason.
God damn it, man.
But all right,
Oh,
moving
okay.
on.
Okay, so generations and mental health. Okay, we've talked about a lot of stuff. We've given you some base knowledge, some generalizations. Oh, I didn't say that earlier. I wanted to say it, but I'll take the opportunity to say it now. These are generalizations. These are not the end all be all. This does not characterize every single generation. There is differences, 100%. Differences based off of how people grew up, based off of experiences they've had. Just because some of the things we're about to say may seem more on the negative side does not mean that it fits everybody, and does not mean that people don't have the opportunity to change or to learn. So just want to throw that out there. These are generalizations, but there's some validity in it for sure. Like in doing research and reading up on stuff for this episode of my class, there's definitely some validity. So anyway, so looking at the generations and mental health. So because of the characteristics that we mentioned earlier and other things, each generation appears to have a different view on mental health, and it makes sense. The experiences you had growing up definitely shape your worldview. Part of your worldview, even if it's a small part, is how you view mental health. So again, these are generalizations, but just things to keep in mind.
Mhm.
Overall, older generations, like baby boomers and Gen X, they do tend to have a view on mental health that having these struggles is a sign of weakness. And sometimes they struggle to understand how someone can even have mental health struggles. I think of my students, my teens have had over the years of like, oh, well, they have everything they need. Like, what are we like? How are they having a hard time? That makes no sense to me. And so I think because of that, it creates maybe some animosity, some headbutting across the different generations when it comes to parents and their kids. But that's kind of what we see when it comes to baby boomers and Gen X, right? They're this generation that's grown up, they're hardworking, they've done things for themselves, they've taken care of themselves, they're very resourceful. So why would anyone have a hard time? You can just get yourself out of it, right? You work harder and you'll be okay. So that's kind of what we've seen in our work.
Yeah, and I noticed that some of my patients who are being raised by boomers, and usually it's like a grandparent raising, they'll make statements kind of like what you had mentioned, where it's like they got a roof over their head, they got food on
Mm-hmm.
the table, like what do they
Yeah.
have to be depressed about? And it's like
Mm-hmm.
a lot
A
still.
lot,
There's a
yeah.
lot, yeah, there's a lot they can be depressed about. And
Yeah.
you know, in the grand scheme of things, like, yeah, it's wonderful that you have a roof over your head and food on your
Mm-hmm.
table, but that doesn't mean that genetically you're not predispositioned to be depressed or have things like schizophrenia or bipolar
Yeah.
disorder. Like, it's not always so cut and dry. Like, just because you have these amenities doesn't mean that you can avoid mental health complications altogether.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, they did grow up in a time where it was that pull yourself up by your bootstraps mentality.
Yeah.
And so and I do think that it is changing. This is kind of the mindset that boomers had when they were younger. But I think a lot of boomers are starting to listen to younger generations, be flexible and plastic in their thinking so that they can actually adjust. And so I don't think they're
Yeah.
all like that still, but that seems like it was the definite prevailing thought.
Yeah. Do you feel like, given what we've talked about already, and even just your experience in your work, do you feel like you can understand where that view comes from for Gen X baby boomers? This like, just pull yourself up by your bootstraps, or work hard and you can get through it. Does that make sense to you?
In a way, yes,
Yeah.
because I think the brain goes to whatever answer is going to be the easiest and
Mm-hmm.
the answer that's going to not make you think too much. So
Mm-hmm.
if you just say, "Oh, they just need to work harder. Oh, there's not really a big issue. It's just kind of their fault." Then you
Mm-hmm.
don't actually have to fix the problem. You don't actually have
Yeah.
to think about what the solutions are, what's causing it. You can just kind of write it off and keep going. So
Mm-hmm.
I think it was just easier for that generation. And I think they were really very focused on working. Like they
Yeah.
were the generation, especially I've seen it in my parents too. They were under the belief that you worked to the bone, like you worked hard and sacrificed yourself for your work. And that's changing in the younger generations, which I think is a good and healthy thing.
Yeah.
But it seems like for the boomer generation, anything that got in the way of work was bad. It needed to
Mm-hmm.
be ignored, and you needed to just focus on work and keep pushing.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know how to articulate this. It's like the idea of like, worked in the same company for 47 years, never took a sick day, and got all my sick
Yeah.
days left over. Yeah.
And that's usually a point of pride for boomers, right? Like, yeah, I
Yes.
never took a sick day, never missed a
Hmm.
day. I was very loyal. And
Yeah. I mean, time off is fun. I don't know.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
healthy.
Yeah.
Balance is good.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Balance is
So
good.
I'm
Yeah.
glad these things have changed, but
Hmm.
that's what our older generations, our boomers, did
Hmm.
have growing up.
Yeah.
As
And,
far as
not to cut you off, but a another point to maybe highlight or emphasize like that perspective: worked hard, did all these things, never took a day off, and look at what we ended up with. It's like,
yeah,
yeah, that's a positive thing. You got a house, you took care of your kids, your family, all these things. Like, those are things to be very prideful about and to be very proud of. And it's an opportunity to reflect and know that if that's the end goal, there's not just one way to get there. You don't have
yeah,
to, beat yourself up over a job for this amount of years, and you don't have to stick things out. Sometimes you can get up and leave, try something
yeah.
different. So anyway, that, I guess, yes, the answer I think both of us can come to is it makes sense how
Yeah.
we get to this perspective. Yeah.
One thing my dad's kind of talked about in the past, which I think was a really excellent point, was that the boomers were the hippie generation in the 60s.
Hmm.
And at the time, everyone thought that they were going to change everything. They were going to stop being so corporately minded. They were going to
Yeah.
stop being so money focused. and then they ended up becoming the exact same thing that they were rebelling against, which
Hmm.
is fascinating to me, that it was kind of hypocrisy. Like they were supposed to change everything and then
Yeah.
ended up becoming what they hated. I think
Yeah.
that's interesting. The allure of the money, just it was too much.
At some point, the bell bottom jeans and the peace sign necklace had to get traded in for the suit and tie. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the I've just heard that so many times.
Yeah.
The age old phrase.
Yeah. The doobie had to run out of flame at some point. Just
We're gonna have more of these. We'll keep thinking of
yeah.
the Volkswagen
So,
bus ran out of gas.
God damn it. They made it electric. Okay, so all right, enough. Let's
Yeah, yeah.
we got to talk about the younger people too a little bit.
Mm.
When we look at the younger generations, right? We got millennials, we got Gen Z. There seem to be some factors that contribute to their overall generational openness to mental health, right? Mental health literacy, I think, is a huge one. People just have a better understanding of mental health. They are exposed to it more. They've learned. They've been more curious about it. I think when you have a generation that's older, that's all about working hard, not letting things get in the way, we're not taking the time to maybe stop and think of like, why am I struggling with this, or why am I sad, or why am I feeling this way? So I think these younger generations are more open to finding out those answers. There's definitely less in stigma. There's more normalization about it. And then the increased access to information about mental health. I will say, if I had a nickel for every time I had a teen that was like fascinated by the DSM-5 that I had on my desk, I'd have about $1. And that's in like the almost 8 years of working. That's pretty good. So I don't know.
Yeah.
That's just, it's anecdotal, but there's definitely some there's interest in it, and maybe in more of a way than ever before.
Yeah. And I think a big piece of that too is a piece of that openness is the fact that social media has given people a way to hear perspectives that they otherwise wouldn't have heard, especially as someone who grew up in Wyoming where it's mostly just white people.
Mm,
Being able to see other people's perspective from around the world on social media, that was such a new thing.
yeah.
It's crazy that it's gone from learning other people's point of views to just being indoctrinated into extremism.
Yeah.
But, at the beginning, it was a really wonderful thing. And it
Yeah.
really did help people understand other people's perspectives.
There was for sure, and even probably still now, but there's definitely like an emphasis on just being real and like learn like realness, like really seemed to do well on social media for a long, and it probably
Yeah.
still does, but it's definitely shifted over the last 4 or 5 years if you think of something like TikTok and Instagram. But one thing that I will say that I think kind of maybe plagues the younger generations when it comes to mental health struggles is this idea of, if everybody has mental health struggles, if everybody's depressed, if everyone is anxious, if everyone has autism, does anyone really have mental health concerns, depression, anxiety, autism? And I think it's a fair question. I think there's definitely, we had a really good discussion on this in my class. I think it was part of like this uh, lecture, but also someone had brought in like an article about TikTok specifically and self-diagnosis. There is probably this idea of like, we may be diagnosing things more frequently, or we probably are diagnosing, or we are diagnosing things more frequently. What is the reason for that? Are we overdiagnosing? Are people self-diagnosing too much? Are we just better at finding it? I don't know, but I feel like it's a fair question. Like,
Mhm.
if everyone has it, does anyone really have it?
Yeah. And what we're starting to understand more and more about mental health issues is that a lot of times it's a spectrum. Like you might
Yeah.
only be like a little tiny bit depressed, but that's still, you go through times of feeling depressed, and
Hmm.
that's normal. But when it gets to being in the way of your life, that's when we start to pathologize it and say like, okay, maybe you need some help for that,
Yeah.
for depression.
Yeah. And I feel like, I don't know if you've heard anything of this, and we haven't had a new DSM, and I'm not even going to count the text revised, but we haven't had a new DSM since 2013. But I
Yes.
feel like for a while, people have been saying like, oh, the next one is going to be more of like, things will be on a spectrum. I don't know if you've heard that, but I think like
Hmm.
that might be the direction we're going in, of like, yes, maybe more people are diagnosed, but it's because we have this more spectrum that may be better fits the acuity and intensity of like symptoms and what people are dealing with.
Yeah. And I think you made a really good point earlier that I saw that quite a bit in clinical practice, especially over COVID, of especially with all the social media influencers and everything. A lot of kids were coming in saying like, I have autism, I have a dissociative personality disorder, I have
Mm-hmm.
X, Y, and Z, you diagnose me and treat me.
Yeah.
And it's like, whoa, where did you hear about this? And nine
Yeah.
times out of 10, it was, oh, there was an influencer there. I heard it on TikTok,
Yeah.
which, I mean, I'm sure there are some people that really legitimately had those things, and
Mm-hmm.
TikTok taught them about it and got them to understand it a little bit better. But it's kind of a double-edged sword there, because it seemed like I remember watching a lot of ADHD videos where they were talking about stuff like, oh, if you do this, you have
Oh,
ADHD. And it's
oh,
like,
don't even fucking get
that's
me
not a
started.
diagnostic criteria. That's not a
Yeah.
symptom. That's just this one random person. So
Yeah.
there's just a lot of bad information out there on social media.
If you sleep with your hand under your chin, you have autism. What the fuck? What? What?
Yeah, just weird stuff
Yeah,
like that, right?
yeah,
Where
man.
it could apply to anyone, but it doesn't really apply to every. Yeah, it's just
Yeah,
silly.
yeah, and that that might have been a sign when that kind of content was starting to take off of like, oh well, this is what's like really getting the views of these like fake diagnostic criteria where people are like searching out like when you couple it with generations that are more curious about mental health and are seeking information, and then
Yeah,
instead of turning to books and text and stuff which are boring to read, you turn to short form videos because it's easier to get information that way sometimes.
yeah.
And then you're looking for the information and then you find it, like 10 signs you have autism. Hell yeah, I sleep with my hand under my chin. Autism.
Yeah, it's tricky.
Yeah, so that's kind of the main pieces we wanted to share today, but some things to discuss and kind of go over. Justin, in your practice, like what, I know we both of us primarily focus with teens, but because of that, we
Hmm.
also get exposed to their parents and even their grandparents or caregivers, and those are usually of a different generation. But what generational differences have you noticed regarding mental health in your own practice?
I would say the most obvious one is just the technology, that
Yeah.
kids these days don't socialize in person very much anymore. Most
Hmm.
of their social life is on the phone, on the Xbox, on the computer. So most of their free time is spent isolating to their room. And
Hmm.
every single day, I've got families coming in saying, like, I can't get my kid out of the room. They're in there for 8 hours a day on their
Yeah.
devices and tuning out the world. Um, Families don't really seem to spend that much time together. Like families used to go walks together. They used to go out together and do fun things. I have so many families that just tell me like, I've got nothing in common with my parents. They don't
Hmm.
foster any of these interests with them. So they're like I'll ask families all the time, like, what do you do for fun together? And they have absolutely nothing,
Yeah.
because they have such widely different lives. And the funny thing is now the parents are also addicted to their screens. And so
Yeah.
they're just in separate rooms on their phones doing completely opposite things. And it just feels like this younger generation is so disconnected. And I
Hmm.
tell my young people all the time that studies are showing that this seems to be the most lonely generation in history. And it's
Hmm.
because they're not having those face-to-face interactions with their peers. They're choosing to have those interactions on their phones, and those tend to make you more lonely in the long run, is having those online relationships.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like if I were to mention something different, probably just the headbutting of like between generations when it
Yeah.
comes to parents and their kids, caregivers and their kids, foster parents and their kids, whatever it is, whatever adult they have in their life, just the differences. And you hear, oh, kids these days and things like that. I think are something that I see a lot, and
Yeah.
it's not to shit on any generation. It's just trends that we notice.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So how does this information about differences in generations, how does it affect our work? Like, is it
Mm.
useful information for us? What do you think?
I mean, shit, I hope so, because we just talked about it for like 30 minutes.
We wouldn't be doing the episode
Yeah.
otherwise.
Yeah, I think it's good to. I've been talking to my class a lot about this. Again, teaching cultural foundations. Like, base information is really good to have. General information is really good to have. Is it going to guide every single interaction we have with a client? Maybe it'll have some kind of impact. Is it going to answer every single question we have about a client? Fuck no, right? Because people are so different from each other. We have
Yeah.
to look at the individual. But I think having the general knowledge is really important, because we can at least have this idea of like, okay, these kids probably have an understanding of technology and social media use. So if they do, I can probably talk about social media pretty openly and pretty directly, because they know exactly what I'm talking about. I think it helps the work. I think it helps us to just kind of be knowledgeable about who we're working with, and what kind of experiences they may have, or have had, or are going to have. It's just, I think it's good to have the info.
Yeah, especially because what I've very much learned in my career is that people's parents aren't always the one raising the child.
Yeah.
There's a lot of non-traditional families out there. There's a lot of grandparents raising their grandkids.
Yeah.
There's a lot of foster care stuff. There's a lot of interesting intergenerational play, and you never know what generation is going to get matched up with another generation and how they're going to mesh.
Hmm.
So it's interesting to see that in my job, and the similarities in certain conflicts, like when there's boomer grandparents raising their kids, kind of the same trends that keep popping up in those families is
Yeah.
interesting to me. But yeah, it's useful to know. The more information and the more we understand other people and our patients, the better.
Yeah. Yeah. Have you ever seen any times where like a parent, caregiver, whoever's in charge, has kind of flipped their stance on something during the time you work with? Maybe stop saying that their kid is soft, or that they just got to kind of figure it out or deal with it. Have you ever seen anything like that?
Yeah, I think absolutely. People, it, it feels like in today's world, we're taught to think that people can't change their minds,
Hmm.
because what we get is all people who are so very polarized. And yes, there are people who are very stuck in their ways that I've noticed, especially people with mental health problems tend to be very
Yeah.
inflexible, very rigid. But parents care about their kids.
Hmm.
And if it means helping their child by changing their ideas, most parents would change their mind to help their child, is what I've
Yeah.
noticed too, which is promising,
Hmm.
considering there is a lot of conversation about the intergenerational fighting and butting heads. But
Yeah.
deep down, I think people are willing to change for the best thing for their child.
Yeah. Yeah. I was going to say my example was just going to be like, I've definitely seen, unfortunately, when something pretty severe happens to the child or to the teen, parents tend to like, oh shit, okay, like
Yeah.
I get it now. So, which you wish it wouldn't have to get to there in the first place, but if everything ends up okay and everyone's safe, then kind of is what it is.
Yeah.
All right. Any last thoughts?
Take home points. Generations are different.
Yes.
And it's not all good, it's not all bad, but it's worth it to try and understand where other generations are coming from.
Hmm.
That's one of the things I like about mental health. Like growing up, I always just wanted to understand why people are the way they are, and
Hmm.
understanding what generation people come from helps you understand why they make the decisions that they do, who they are,
Exactly.
why they are who they are.
Hmm.
Can't speak today. So I think it's fun. I appreciate you bringing up this topic so that we can talk about this, learn about from each other. So yeah, I think uh, love your boomers.
I think that's fair. I think my take home point is, yeah, just the when we can start to see the intersection of like each generation's social, cultural, political, technological things that have impacted who they are today, we can kind of start to understand like why we see some of these generalizations. So yeah, I think it's important. So with
Cool.
that, on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. You can find us. Feel free to follow, like, subscribe, share with your friends, family, a loved one, whoever you would like to. Leave us a 5-star review. You can leave us a comment. Someone had left us a comment when we did our which one was it? The Child Stars, and I talked about, or we both talked about what channel Nickelodeon was on and stuff.
Yeah.
So there's a comment on our Spotify on our most recent episode. So thank you, thank you for leaving that, and anyone else, feel free to leave us a comment, 5-star review, all that good stuff on social media at Millennial MHC and our website millennialmhc.com. And with that, we'll see you at our next episode. And remember, take care of your mentals.